Okay, we're in part 4 of demand and supply. We're going to go through a little bit more of what we mean by equilibrium. We're going to review that again because it is a pretty crucial topic. We're also now going to start to talk about what happens if the demand or the supply curve changes. Right? We've talked about why they might change. We haven't seen a change when we have them graphed together. So our equilibrium, remember, this is the balance point. There will be one price where the quantity demanded equals the quantity supplied. Exactly. On this graph, the price of $3 is our equilibrium price, and looks like the quantity is 15 in this particular graph, right? And look, both the demand has a quantity of 15 and the supply has a quantity of 15 for this particular graph. And this is actually going back, this is the latte example, but we're now putting this on the same graph. Once again, I mean, I might sound like a broken record saying this, but that's okay. Quantity goes on the x-axis, price goes on the y-axis. Always, 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 every time. Demand curve here is labeled with a D, supply curve is labeled with an S. Right? And we've got our equilibrium price of $3, quantity of 15, and you see that in the demand schedule and the supply schedule when they're put together in this particular example. Price of $3, quantity demanded 15, quantity supplied is also 15. So this covers both the equilibrium price and the equilibrium quantity. What we want to look at now is what happens if you're not in equilibrium. So if you have a price that's too high, and by too high, I mean, I don't mean like, we're not imposing a normative judgment on high versus low. When we say too high, we just mean if you have a price that's above the equilibrium price, what's going to happen? Well, we're going to be considering an example of $5, right? What happens if you have a price of $5? Well, before we even put in anything or go through this, if you have a price of $5, you should be able to notice that, well, the quantity demanded would be over here, and the quantity supplied is over here. That would seem to pose a problem, or I would hope when you're looking at this you'd say, boy, that seems to pose a problem. If the quantity demanded is much lower than the quantity supplied, well, you have consumers aren't buying the product, producers have a lot left over, and we actually will define that as a surplus, right? If you have the price of $5, what the demand is 9 lattes, right? Consumers will buy 9 lattes at a price of $5, but the firms would want to sell 25. So we would call that a surplus, that area surplus, and actually you can determine the exact amount of the surplus. It's just this horizontal distance, right? 25 minus 9, you get a surplus of 16 lattes. So anytime you have a price that's higher than the equilibrium price, it's going to result in a surplus. Firms will think, wow, this is a great deal. I get more money. They're going to try to sell more. Consumers are thinking, wow, this is an awful deal. I have to pay more than equilibrium. I'm going to buy less. Quantity supplied will be greater than quantity demanded. That's a surplus. What do you suppose will happen, though, if there's a surplus? Assuming no government restrictions, like the price is free to move. Well, imagine the farmer's market where this happens. If you have a surplus, what do you suppose the sellers will do to try to get rid of their surplus? I'm guessing most of you have enough experience in the real world to think, well, if there's a surplus, right, so when sellers lower the price, and you'd be absolutely right. On top of that, savvy buyers should realize, wait a second, these sellers have way too much. I'm not going to spend the $5 on this anymore. I'll offer a little bit lower. Now, what you would then expect to see is the price will drop. When the price drops, the quantity demanded goes up. Well, that's a good thing in terms of cutting the surplus, right? You could see if the quantity demand goes here from 9 to 12, that would cut the surplus somewhat, but the supply also decreases, right? Because when the price is no longer $5, the amount that would be supplied will drop a little bit, drops down to 20, and what we see is a smaller surplus. Now, we see a smaller surplus, but what we would expect to see actually, though, eventually, is it goes back to the equilibrium price, because we still do have a surplus here, right? The quantity supplied fell, and the quantity demanded increase, right? 9 to 12, 25 to 20. The amount of the surplus fell. If you recall before, it was the surplus in the initial example at $5 was 16 units. Now, it's only 8 units, but we still do have a surplus, right? So we would still expect the same thing to happen. You would expect sellers to cut the price. You would expect buyers who are savvy enough to realize that sellers have too much. They've got to cut the price. So the prices would continue to fall until you hit the equilibrium, where the quantity that's demanded exactly equals the quantity that's supplied. So the price would continue to fall until you hit this exact point. So what about the opposite example? That's called a shortage. So a shortage will occur when the quantity demanded is greater than the quantity supplied. That's going to happen if the price is too low. And once again, by too low, I mean it's lower than equilibrium, right? We have some price that would match demanded supply, quantity demanded and quantity supplied, I'm sorry. If you have a price that's well below that, what are we going to see? Well, you're going to see the amount that firms will sell is going to be a lot lower than the amount that consumers will purchase. That's going to result in a shortage of the product. Consumers are going to want far more, right? Here we see, in this particular case, quantity demanded at $1 is 21, quantity supplied is only 5. Shortage of 16 lattes. Well, what would you expect in this particular case? Well, at $1, you have a lot more consumers who are willing to buy than firms. Some of these consumers say, you know what, I'll pay more than $1. Anybody sell me a latte for $2? And really a lot of consumers would be willing to buy for $2. So if you saw a shortage, and once again, let's imagine the farmer's market, right? If there's a shortage of products, farmers would realize, I can charge more. And they would, right? You know, they could charge more because they'll get it. So they'd increase the price from $1 to $2. The quantity demanded drops, the quantity supplied increases, and the shortage is now smaller, right? The shortage was 16 units from 21, a quantity demanded of 21 to a quantity supplied of 5, that's 16. Now we have a quantity demanded of 18, quantity supplied of 10. The shortage is only 8 units. Shortage has been reduced, and we'll actually expect that to continue until you get to equilibrium, right? Even at the shortage of $2, you'll expect to see prices continue to increase until the demand exactly equals the supply, and you get to that market equilibrium. So, question, are there cases where you see surpluses and shortages in the real world? Well, from time to time, it can happen, but you know, I mean, usually it won't happen too often because usually the market will take care of it pretty quick by adjusting the prices. Some cases where you will continually see shortages and surpluses. Super Bowl tickets, every year you'll see this, right? The NFL puts what we might think is a pretty high price. I mean, I think they charge like $500 a ticket for the Super Bowl, but that's nothing compared to what buyers can get for it outside by, you know, the term scalping the tickets, you know, in the ticket resale market. The sellers for the Super Bowl tickets often can get like $3,000 a ticket, which is telling us that $500 is too low. If it was priced right, there wouldn't be a resale market for tickets, right? They would all just sell at the normal price and you'd have a sold-out stadium. That would be fine. But because you have this resale market, it tells you there's a shortage of it. Surpluses, from time to time you'll see surpluses, but what you would tend to see is the price will drop to get rid of the surplus product. But in general, the market does a pretty good job of getting rid of shortages and surpluses. So we just went through this graphically. We're going to just kind of talk through this a little bit more. Surplus, it's defined any price where the quantity supplied is greater than the quantity demanded. Shortage, any price where the quantity demanded is greater than the quantity supplied. So if the price is above the equilibrium price, we went through this. Right, on your own, if you want some reinforcement, just draw out what I'll call a generic demand curve, a generic supply curve, put in a price above. What should happen? Well, remember we kind of thought through the logic on this one. You're going to move towards the equilibrium, right? You're going to have the price is so high that the supply exceeds the demand. Producers have to lower the price to get rid of their product. Consumers realize the producers have all this extra product. They're going to lower the price they offer, have a movement towards equilibrium. What we can now say, based on our analysis, is the market, if the government doesn't interfere, or some other body doesn't interfere, will cause shortages and surpluses to disappear. You won't have shortages and surpluses. The reason for this is prices are going to move to the equilibrium. So prices move to the equilibrium, quantity demanded will equal quantity supplied. And while this may not seem so fascinating to you, this is what, at the beginning of the lesson, Adam Smith found so amazing, right? There's no shortages and surpluses in these colonial markets. There weren't. And if you think about the fact that happens today, we don't have shortages and surpluses in our economy. We just don't have them. Why? Prices will adjust. We take it for granted now, but this is something that Adam Smith just thought was so fascinating, and we have now gone through the building blocks to kind of figure out what it was that was causing, these colonial markets to always have demand and supply match each other. So it is a big benefit that in a market economy, the prices will adjust automatically. You don't have to have some entity trying to control it. They'll just adjust on their own and make sure you don't have any extra product available or shortages. Shortages and surpluses will disappear. It's really one of the huge benefits of a market economy. More of our initial supply and demand lesson. We are now going to look through another method for determining equilibrium price and quantity, and that is by using algebra. So what we've done so far, we've done this graphically. We've kind of used demand schedules, supply schedules, plotted them. We found the equilibrium graphically. We can also use algebra to do this. Using the algebra, it's quite a bit more elegant, actually, and much less likely to make any errors, right? If you graph, it's pretty easy to make just a tiny little mistake. You don't find quite the right answer. Not so with the algebra. So let's consider a simple example, right? Quantity demanded is represented by the equation 600 minus 100 times the price. Quantity supplied, 200 times the price, right? How do we determine the equilibrium price and quantity? Well, remember, in equilibrium, quantity demanded equals quantity supplied, right? The quantity demanded equals quantity supplied. Well, set the quantity demanded equal to the quantity supplied and then solve. So what I'm going to do is I want you to pause this, solve this on your own, or at least try to. When you've got your answer, unpause it and we'll go through it together. Okay, I hope you paused it. We're going to go on and go through this together now. So the quantity demanded equals the quantity supplied. Well, what does that imply? It means that 600 minus 100 times the price equals 200 times the price. Right? 600 minus 100 times the price equals 200 times the price. Well, we add 100 times the price to each side. Well, 600 is left alone. The 100 times the price is added to 200 times the price. 600 equals 300 times the price. Divide both sides by 300. The price is $2. So that's the equilibrium price in this example. It's $2. Once the price is known, plug that back into the equations to determine the quantities. right? We had a demand equation and a supply equation, right? Quantity demanded 600 minus 100 times the price, we know the price is $2. Quantity supplied 200 times the price, we know the price is $2. And actually, this is a really good method to check whether we did it right, because the demand and the supply, quantity demanded and quantity supplied should be the same, right? We set them equal to each other. Well, the quantity demanded, 600 minus 100 times the $2 price is 400. Quantity supplied is also 400. That's really good. They matched. What's really nice about doing it with the algebra is they're going to match or you did it wrong, right? And if they match, it's almost guaranteed you got it right. I mean, there's a chance you could have made 2 mistakes that were exactly coincide, and that's how you got the quantity demanded and quantity supplied to match up. But usually it will only match if you did it right. It's nice because when you complete the problem, you'll know you got it right. It's always a nice feeling. So in equilibrium, the quantity is 400, price is $2. Okay, a second example. Another demand curve, another supply curve. Take a moment, find the equilibrium price and quantity. I want you to pause it, and then we will go through it together. Okay, I hope you paused it. We're about to go through this together now. Remember, so quantity demanded equals quantity supplied, right? That's what has to happen in equilibrium, which means 60 minus 5 times the price. That's the demand curve. That has to equal 2 times the price minus 10. Let's add 10 to both sides. Means 70 minus 5 times the price equals 2 times the price. Now let's add 5 times the price to both sides. $70 therefore equals 7 times the price, or our price equals 10. So that's our equilibrium price. Our equilibrium quantity, we plug the price back into the equations. So our quantity demanded equals 60 minus 5 times the price, but the price is 10. So that's 10 units. 60 minus 50 is 10. Quantity supplied, it needs to match up. If it doesn't match up, we did it wrong. 2 times the price of 10 minus 10. Well, that's 20 minus 10 equals 10. The equilibrium price is 10. The equilibrium quantity, also 10. So in our example, price of 10, quantity of 10, that is our equilibrium.